Anyway.
Okay. That's going to get me started back in our studies, since everybody's going to run home and sell all the worldly goods, right?
He said we could live in a trailer.
You told me I'd be living by myself.
Well, I did remember you guys were living in the Winnebago and the little,
We have lived simply.
the little,
It was cold at times.
yeah, I bet it was out there in that little,
Out in the shed.
that you
shop.
said.
I can handle it better today than I did then.
I doubt it.
Well, I think we all, at some given point in time, I mean, I remember living in some places that was pretty simple, you know. They could be, if you ran an ad in the paper today, it would be classified as 3 bedrooms and a path.
Yes.
Ours was like 3 bedrooms and 2 baths, all in one room.
Well, you could have the bath in one room if you brought the big, you know.
No, this was just stuff that went in them. It
Oh,
wasn't,
okay.
It wasn't a physical
It
bath.
wasn't physical bath.
Just all of the supplies.
Or you could say 3 bedrooms and a path and free-range chickens. But you know, you think back about it, I guess because you didn't have anything to gauge it by, you know, I thought it was a pretty good life. I mean, I had fun, you know, as a boy growing up in the country, running all the hills and climbing through trees and
I had a blast.
swinging, you know, riding horses, ponies, and had to do a little work occasionally, but, you know, that was part of it. Split some kindling, chop up some firewood, and go plow some gardens up, but the thought always came to your mind, you like to eat. My grandma always told me, I love blackberries when I was growing up, especially blackberries in the wintertime, you know. My grandma always told me, you know, you like blackberries in the wintertime? You know what you gotta do?
Pick 'em in the
You
summer.
gotta pick them in the summer. I said, oh.
Okay, that's the way that works.
If you want blackberry cobbler and you want blackberry pies and you'd like to have some blackberries with a little sugar sprinkled on them, you're gonna have to pick some, son.
Get out there in that sugar infested place.
Exactly. And I did, because I did like my blackberries. Of course, she picked some too. I mean, we all picked blackberries, but and that was kind of a simple life, you know. And gee, I thought it was okay at that point in time. I guess we just added a lot more technology into the life in our world today. I still think, by the way, that indoor plumbing sometimes is not such a good idea, especially when it leaks.
Yeah.
Which eventually
You will.
it will, and it doesn't become a good idea at that time. However, it's kind of nice in the wintertime. You don't have to go down that path, especially when it snows. But you have to get fully dressed just to go to the bathroom every time.
It's bad when they get too late.
Exactly. Well, you know that old saying, by the way, most people don't understand that old cliche, the old saying, you know, that you don't have a pot to pee in or a window to throw it out. You know where that comes from, by the way?
Some of the good old days.
A pot to pee in. They were called, well, I remember they were called slop jars.
On bedpans, I know.
Well, they called bedpan slop jars. And people use those things at night rather than
Going out.
going outside.
Which
And
is
the
about
next
people.
morning, you know what they did?
Throw them out.
Open the window and out it goes.
Those pecans, I didn't know that.
So if you didn't have a pot to pee in-
Until I was about 15.
If you didn't have a pot to pee in and a window to throw it out, you're in bad shape.
Right.
You didn't have nothing. Right? This is before you didn't have a pot to pee in or a window to throw it out.
When I started deer hunting down South Georgia and they started talking about those pecan trees, I said, I always grew up with them under my bed.
Well, let's face it. I mean, our society's changed. Our people have changed to a large degree, and a lot of it we've brought on ourselves because we do want our children to do better than us. The only problem is that we don't think about how should they do better. Should they do better material-wise, materialistically, or should they do better spiritually? And Of course, we hope that they would do both in some sense, that they would have an easier life than we have. But you know, having an easier life doesn't teach you a lot. When you grow up through the school of hard knocks, you usually learn a lot more, you know. I was listening to this lecture this professor gave. He had it's on the internet. He had cancer of the liver, and he only had, and when he gave his lecture, it was only like he only had about 3 or 4 months to live, based on his CAT scans and the doctor's analysis. By the way, he died Friday. I think he lived a little bit longer than what they thought. And he gave this, his last lecture. He was a professor, gave his last lecture at the college that he was at. He was into this. He worked for Disney somewhat. When you put the little things on, what you call it, the 3D stuff, virtual reality. He did virtual reality stuff. But one thing he says in his lectures, you know, he talks about, you know, hitting brick walls. But he said most people will hit the brick wall and they just stop because they think that that's a brick wall. But he said brick walls are there to make those people that really don't want it to go away. You know, I was thinking what he was saying. When you have somebody that comes to a rabbi and says, "Rabbi, I want to convert." No, you don't want to convert. You know, go back and think about it.
That's the first brick wall.
That's the first brick wall. And they come back, "Rabbi, I really want to convert." Let me tell you, here's the problem. You know, you want to become part of a people that's been hated and persecuted ever since they've been in existence. You should go back and think about it. Second brick wall. And they might be a third brick wall. But you have to, if you're going to be a convert to Judaism, you have to persevere. And what he was saying was that it eliminates, you know, the brick walls eventually eliminate those people that really don't want it. And so the brick walls are just to eliminate the people that really don't want it, and the ones that really want it will extend themselves past the brick wall. So that makes really good sense in some sense in what he said. I mean, a lot of the things he said is actually, he wasn't really a spiritual person, but what he said and how he lived his life. One of the things he said I thought was very interesting. He was talking about his kids. And really he said, he was talking about head fakes, playing football, blah, blah, blah. And he said the real head fake about this whole lecture was it wasn't for you, it was for my kids. He had 3 kids that he was going to be leaving. So the lecture was really pointed toward them, but he gave it at the university, or for them. But he said a lot of interesting things. One of the things I remember him talking about was that they bought a new car, a new convertible car, you know. And so what was one of the first things he did in his new convertible car? He got in the back seat and he spilled some Coke. Right? Now why did he spill the Coke in the back seat of the car? Anybody want to guess?
They won't be upset when the kids do it.
Exactly. So the kids won't feel embarrassed when they do it. I mean, he actually did this.
I didn't do it for that intent. It was an accident.
But I thought that is so kind of telling about this guy, of where he was at.
He was thoughtful.
Very thoughtful person. I mean, for a man to do that, I mean, that's very thoughtful somehow. I don't think most of us would ever think about doing something like that.
Well, it kept him from getting angry.
Yeah, that too. And he said, he said he just didn't want the kids to be embarrassed when they did it, you know, that they feel like, well, you know, now, well, gee, Dad did it, you know, so.
Okay.
Yeah, if we did it, you know, he can't really cuss us out now because he's already done it, right? So I thought that was very telling about him as a person. And he said a couple other things like that I thought was so interesting. Anyway, getting back to our subject, by the way, Jesus the Harp, or rather the Collion, we're on page 691. We're still, of course, in the Gate of the County, chapter 3. And we're just talking about serving God. I mean, this is the service of God and how we go about serving Him. And, of course, we got into the idea that how much effort, how much energy do we put into it, as opposed to how much energy and effort do we put into living in this world. And it seems like probably more energy is exercised trying to get ahead in this world rather than trying to get ahead in the next world. If you want to get ahead in the next world, there's only one way you can do it, and that's by keeping the rules down here. And one of those rules is to draw close to God, to know Him. And how do we do that? You can't do it spatially because He's not physical. So the only way we can do it is with knowledge, with intellect. The very first commandment we talked about was to know Him, to believe in Him, to believe that He exists. And you can only do that mentally and intelligently. And we have to use our minds constantly about those things. Okay? So we got all that. So we're all going to go home and start a very simple life, live in tents, and milk goats and sheep, and kill range chickens. Probably not, but at least we can go away saying, let's really put our major effort into the thing that's going to last the longest. I think that's our point. We have to put our major effort into the things that last the longest. And it's certainly not all those material things that we talked about. So, what's the first thing? We were actually just talking about how do we engage in duties of the heart? Well, we have to clear our minds, obliterate all worldly thoughts and ideas, which is very hard to do, right? And to devote our hearts and our inner consciousness directly to God Himself, and to Him alone, by the way. And what really got us off on that track was talking about an ascetic. An ascetic is someone that just really secludes himself from society, and he can live with a clear mind and concentrate all his energies and so forth towards a certain goal. But at the same time, we're concerned because we can't do that all the time. You can do it for a period of time, but not all the time. The prophets were ascetics for a period of time, but they always came back into society. Because eventually, you cannot really fulfill all the commandments without living in society. We talked about the 7 laws being larger than whole, laws that actually build a proper society. So, if there's not people around you can't steal from, then you can never really keep the commandment of theft, murder, and all those other ones that we talked about. Okay? So he goes on to say, he says, of duties such as these, this is the second paragraph, by the way, of duties such as these can be predicated the statement of our masters of blessed memory. Religious precepts require directed consciousness. Read that again. Religious precepts require directed consciousness, and that's in Tractate Veracos 13a. So what are these sages telling us?
Concentrate on what you're doing and clear your mind of all the superfluities.
Exactly. Concentrate on what you're doing. And this is what I try to reinforce to people is that.
Train your mind to do.
Right. Well, let's think about the fact that let's take the law of theft for banana, right? And how do I actually accomplish that? If I'm just being honest in my dealings with people because I think it's the right thing to do, have I actually fulfilled the law? Now, on the other hand, by the way, if I have an opportunity not to be honest and just, right, and I choose not to do that because God has commanded me not to do that, then I fulfill the law, right? If I think it's just a good thing to do, I shouldn't cheat this person, should cheat that person. You know what I'm going to think sooner or later? I think I'll just cheat that guy. He probably deserves it. See, it's easy if you know somebody and you're having a dealing with them, and they're a good old boy. And good old boys, we don't cheat. Right? Right? We don't cheat good old boys. No, never think about cheating the good old boys. Right? But here comes a guy along. He's rich, got plenty of money. And he's
obnoxious.
And he's obnoxious.
He deserves to be cheated.
He deserves to be taken.
Because he didn't get all of his wealth the honest way.
Exactly. So, we jack the price up a little bit on him, right?
He got it, he'll pay it.
He'll got it, he's pay it. If he wants it, he'll pay it. If he don't, he goes someplace else. You know? But in reality, what are we doing? We're cheating. We're actually executing a type of theft simply because of our mentality about that person. You know, if we're going to be honest in our business dealings, that means we have to be honest with who? Everybody. So we can't up the charges because we think somebody else has got more money than the other guy. If we're going to sell it to the good old boy at a certain price, you know, I used to have a friend of mine, still have a friend of mine, lives in Athens, and he runs an auto parts kind of junkyard type place, builds cars, builds sales, puts them back together. He's been doing it most of his life. And sometimes when I need parts, I would call him, right? And his question to me was, did I want... no, actually his question was, did I want the preacher price or the regular? I always chucked the regular. For some reason, I mean, that was always his question, you know. Did I want the discount preacher price or did I want the regular price? Give me the regular price. Now, I don't know what the preacher's discount price was. It might have been cheaper. Maybe I messed up.
It may have been more expensive.
And it may have been more. From the way he talked, it would have been more expensive. But my point is that we can't really fulfill these laws unless we live in society, unless we fulfill them because we consciously know that God forbid us to do that. You know, because it'd be easy. Like I said, it's not so easy sometimes to steal from some people, but it would be easy to do it from other people. But we got to consciously remember that all our business dealings that we have with people have to be with no theft. Right? We can't steal from people. So he says, religious precepts require directed consciousness. In other words, we got to know and be conscious. Conscious of what? Conscious of God, conscious of the precept, and the fulfillment of it. If a person is engaged, and by the way, if you just fulfill it unconsciously, by the way, have you fulfilled it? No. It's got to have that intent, right? If a person is engaged in one of the duties of the hearts and limbs together, such as prayer or offering praise to God may be exalted, he should free himself from worldly and other worldly activities and clear his mind of all thoughts that would distract him from the essence of prayer. First, though, he should wash and cleanse himself of anything dirty or unclean and move away from any offensive odor and the like. Finally, he should consider who it is that he turns to in his prayer, what he seeks through it, and what are the words and meanings of the prayer that he will utter before his Creator. Now, how many of us actually put that kind of effort into prayer? Few. You know, I think there's another cliche that always comes to my mind, by the way, when we talk about prayer. Be careful what you pray for. You might get it. So sometimes what we actually pray for is not anything that we necessarily need. Exactly. Maybe something that we don't need at all. And if we get it, you know what happens to us? It causes us more harm than it did good.
Yeah, we don't really know how to use it.
Exactly. And we don't know why. You know, I think the best way for us to pray is to always pray within the confines of God's will. And we can pray that way, by the way. Now, as far as things, getting things, I don't think that falls within. Does God want you to have food? Well, that's God's will, right? Does God want you to have clothing? Yes, that's God's will. Would He like for you to have a place to live? Yes. So those things are pretty essential things, right? And God's will that human beings would have those kind of resources. Now, why would He like for us to have those, by the way?
Because if we have those things, we're not having to think about them. We can concentrate more on Him and we won't have that cloud in our mind.
Exactly. And if you remember, we went through the guide for perplexion, where Montes talks about the two different aspects of man. And one aspect is the spiritual man, the other one's the physical man. And what part do you take care of first? The physical. Right? In other words, if a guy's hungry,
Feed him.
feed him.
Because if he's listening to his stomach growl, he can't concentrate on praying to God.
Absolutely not. You know, how can you do anything because all you're doing is thinking about, I need some food, I need some food, I need some food. I'm hungry, you know. So you meet the needs of the body first, and then you go to the next level. Because without meeting those needs, you'll never stifle that craving inwardly, you know, that the body needs for its nourishment or its wants, whatever. So if you don't take care of that first, you'll never get to the spiritual part. But it's hard, like I said, it's hard to pray when your stomach's hitting your backbone. Because all you're thinking about is food. I remember back in the days of the ministry, going to shelter homes. Right? Now, one of the conditions, by the way, of being able to stay in a shelter home, which is kind of like an overnight place for people that were on the street. I remember going to this one in Knoxville, which was a pretty big one. Me and another guy, we used to go up there. And one of the conditions, by the way, for staying the night in the shelter home and getting some food that evening was you had to listen to some guy preach to you. You know, here's what I found out about those people. They'll listen to anything. Right? The only thing they're hoping is, I hope this guy hurry up and gets finished. You know? And after I was there a few times, I remember it was my time to give them, you know, a nice little lecture that night about how they need to straighten their lives up and get saved, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, gee, the only thing these people want to do is eat, you know. So I basically said a blessing for the food and said, okay, let's go. And everybody else was like, you know, what'd you do that for? And I'm like, these people are not going to listen to you. They want to eat. They're hungry. So I just made a blessing for the food and let them go. But maybe they appreciate that, maybe they didn't. But I hopefully realized that at least I understood where they were at. I mean, I'd already ate when I got there. I was fine. But they hadn't probably ate all day, or maybe even some of them probably hadn't eaten in a couple of days. So you begin with the physical part. Right? You take care of that, and then you go to the next part. So God wants us to have certain things. Why? Because if we don't have those certain things, then we're always thinking about having those certain things, and we never really get to accomplish what we're supposed to. So he says we should free ourselves from worldly and other worldly activities. Right? Clear our minds of all thoughts that would distract him from the essence of prayer. He should wash and cleanse himself of anything dirty or unclean. Move away from any offensive odor. That'd be nice, because if you're praying and you smell something, guess what it does?
You think about it.
Yeah, it distracts you, right? Get away from that odor. And finally, we should what? Consider who it is that he turns to in his prayers, what he seeks through it, and what are the world's words and the means of prayer to utter before his Creator. In other words, you better know what you're praying about. Because like I said, the old cliche is you might really get what you're praying for. And we should know exactly what we're going to pray when we get ready to pray. That's why I've always urged people, by the way, ever since I knew there was a Jewish prayer book, to look at the prayers in the prayer book. And you might have to change a word or two here and there, but they knew what to pray for. Right? And by the way, there's room in there for you too. Right? It's called silent prayer. You just insert your own little prayer right in there. So he says you should know that words are uttered with the tongue and are like the husk, while meditating on the words is like the kernel. The recital of the prayer is like the body, while the meditation is like the soul. When one prays with his tongue, while his heart is preoccupied with something other than the meaning of the prayer, his prayer is like a body without a soul, or a husk without its kernel. His body is present, but his heart is not with him while he is praying. Of such a person, Scripture says, because that people pretend to draw near with their mouth and with their lips, they honor me, while their hearts they keep far from me. That's a nice little quotation, of course, from Yeshayahu, or Isaiah 29:13, when you have people that are going through the motions, and he says with their lips, right, with their mouths, they draw nigh, but they're what? On their heart, it's far from them. So they're going through the motions, but that's all it is. There's no really intent behind it. And then he gives us another analogy. He says, a further analogy is drawn to a servant who, when visiting his home by his master, ordered his wife and household members to show honor to the master and provide him with all his needs, while he himself went off and indulged in pleasures and frivolity and refrained from personally serving his master, neither exerting himself in his honor nor showing him the respect that was due him. His master became angry at him and did not accept the honor and service offered to him, but threw it all back in his face. So he's trying to do what? What's the story here? If you were trying to figure out the analogy, now he's going to tell you what the analogy is, right? What's your analogy of the story? Then when you get to the story, you try to figure out what the guy's saying before you actually read the next paragraph. Yeah, well, it is, because he's doing what? Did it cost him anything in the long term?
Anytime other people do something he didn't want to do.
Right, designated to other people to do something that he preferred not to do.
But he wanted the credit for it.
But he wanted credit for it. So he says the same is true of one who prays. If his heart and consciousness are oblivious to the prayer's meaning, God will not accept his prayer, which is only mechanical, a mere movement of the tongue. Right? So prayer is not as simple as some people think it is. And preparing yourself for prayer. And remember, the words that you're saying, you have to know what you're saying. And you hear people just blither on sometimes. You wonder, have they give any thought to what they're saying at all? Or have they thought any at all? The one thing I think that most people never do, and that's really analyze their prayers. Right? If you really analyze your prayers, sometimes you're going to find out it's nothing but a big I. I want this. And I want that. You know, and then we get that really unselfish thing. I wish they had that. But you know what we still get in? We still get our eye in it somehow. It's all about me either wanting something or me wanting somebody else to have something. Still I. You know. We try to get those eyes out of it, by the way, and pray. And by the way, one of the best ways to do this, by the way, is start out your prayer with something that has nothing to do with you. And it's called praise. Look in the Jewish prayer book. It gets you disconnected from who? From yourself. And all of a sudden, you should enter into his courts with praise and thanksgiving. That's how you enter in. And once you get in the court, then you're aware of who you're speaking to. You got to get in the court first. How you get in the court? You're enter into his court not because, oh, I want to be in the court, God. I would love to be in your court. He's already told us how to get into his court. You enter into his court with praise, thanksgiving. Now, once you get in the court and you realize you're in the king's court, you know what you're going to say then? Nothing about I and me. Right? Because now you're going to stand in awe of him. It's about what he would like for you to be, and what he would like for others to be, and how you react to other people. So it's a good way to start entering into prayer is to just sit down and for a real few minutes at least, just praise Hashem and be thankful. And look, we all have something to be thankful for. Many of us have much to be thankful for. And if you're not thankful for anything, you can thank for you're still alive. Now, he goes on to say, just look at what we say at the conclusion of the Amida. And Amida just means standing prayer. Some say the Amidah, Amida. It's just standing. It means, that's what the word means. It means standing. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable before you. Oh, this is in the prayer book? May the words of my mouth, to stop there, and the meditation of my heart be acceptable for you. It's not mouthing words, right? Now you can go through the Amida and just mouth words. I mean, you can. You shouldn't, but you can. But you're asking God to do what? To accept your prayers based on what? You said them, my words. What else? Intent. So if you just say the words with no intent, what's God going to say?
You're not putting no effort behind it, so therefore it's meaningless.
It's meaningless. You forget it. But you're saying, I am. You know, accept my prayers because I'm saying the words and my heart's in it. And that's the only way they're going to be acceptable to me. So he says, if a person's thought during the Amida prayer dwell on some worldly matter, permitted or forbidden, and then he concludes by saying, may the meditation of my heart be acceptable before you, is this not most shameful? To claim to have communed with God in his heart and innermost being when he was actually distracted? So that actually happens. You're praying in Amida. What should you do? You should stop where you're at, clear your mind, and get back on track, right? Because at the end of this prayer, you're going to ask God to accept it on the basis of what? The words I've said and the meditation of my heart. So he says, it's most shameful to claim to commune with God in his heart and innermost being when he was actually distracted. Then he asked God to accept the prayer and be pleased with it. He is like one of whom it was said, as if they were a people that had acted righteously, as if they desired closeness to God. Notice that little word, if, hypothetically, as if they were pretending. And it's also in Isaiah or Yeshayahu, chapter 58, verse 2. Our sages of blessed memory said, one should gauge himself. If he is capable of concentrating, he should pray, but if not, he should not pray. Wait a minute, shouldn't we pray? But if you're not capable of concentrating at that moment, you shouldn't do what? Should not pray.
I made myself, all distracted too.
No, that's the point. You shouldn't pray. Because your heart's not in it. Right? This is in the Tractate Barakos, by the way, which is blessings, right? Barakot, 30b. So they say one should gauge himself. If he is capable of concentrating, he should pray, but if not, he should not pray. Before Rabbi Eleazar died, he included in his charge to his disciples, when you pray, know before whom you are praying. It's also in Isaiah. Oh, excuse me, it's in Barakot 28b. Scripture says, prepare to meet your God, O Yisrael. That's in one of the minor prophets, Amos chapter 4 and verse 12. Our masters of blessed memory said, "Do not make your prayer a mere routine, but a plea for mercy and entreaty before the omnipresent." That's in Perky of Oak, the Sayings of the Fathers, chapter 2 and saying number 13. It further says, "When my soul was wrapped in prayer," when my soul was wrapped in prayer, what's the great line, by the way? I did what? I remembered God. Who's that saying that? That's our good old prophet to the Gentile, right? Jonah. Chapter 2 and verse 8. "Let us lift our hearts together with our hands to God in heaven." You're just going to say the words? What's the first thing it says to lift? Your hands? Lift your heart. And then it says what? Lift your hands. Because again, it's back to that intent of the heart. If you're going to pray, as the sages said, if you really can't concentrate at that moment, don't pray. It's not worth it to think that you're going to get at the end of a prayer and say, may my words and the meditation of my heart be accepted, when you know that you're not. He said, "You should know, my brother, that our goal in prayer is none other than the soul's longing for God and its submission before Him, that it glorifies its Creator, offering praise and thanksgiving to His name, casting all of its burdens upon Him." That's the whole intent of prayer. It's not about praying for what I want. Now, the reality is, and I think, I can say this two different ways, okay? This is going to be one of those Jack Saunders I thinks. First of all, is God omniscient? All-knowing? Okay. Does He know what you need before you come before Him?
Oh, yeah.
Huh?
So you don't have to ask Him. It's irrelevant to you ask Him.
Now, I said need. N-E-E-D. Not W-O-N-T. He knows what you need. He also knows what you want. Well, God sometimes give you the desires of your heart. Yes, He will. So He knows what we need. He also knows what we want. And sometimes He will give us even the desires of our hearts, whatever that is, whether it's a need or a want, by the way. Needs, I think, you don't really have to ask for. Things we want, we're going to ask for. But is that really a desire of the heart? Because the desire of the heart really is something that we're going to use to benefit who? Not ourselves, but eventually use it in the service of God, if our heart's connected to Him right. So where should we expend most of our prayer time? Tell Him what we want. Since He already knows our needs. Now, by the way, we should ask. We should let Him know. Right? So that's what petitions are all about. It's like you go and you petition an earthly king, and he decides whether he gives you that or not. The heavenly king should also be petitioned. But also you should be thanking for what? For what He's already done. And that should be the first thing that you do. So, in this case, by the way, like I said, the greatest thing, by the way, that one can learn to do is kind of use the Jewish prayer book. Like I said, every word can a few words in the prayer can be switched, and it works fine for you. And what it does, by the way, it gives you something to concentrate on. And it takes you away from about me and my. Right? And it really kind of trains you how to pray. So that's what they've done, and they've been doing it for thousands of years now. They've pretty much perfected the idea of prayer. So for us to just dismiss that and think we can whip it up in a few years and make ours better than theirs, I think we're missing that whole boat. If what's the old saying? If something has worked good for thousands or hundreds of years or for a few years, don't do what? Right. If it's not broke, don't fix it. If you can invent something better, then go on. But if you can't invent anything better, stick with what? Stick with what you got. If it works, keep on using it. And so I would suggest that just look through the Jewish prayer book, and you're going to find out that a lot of the prayers will fit for you. You might have to change a word here or two there, but mostly it gives you some kind of direction about what you should pray about. I was telling somebody about if you were looking at a people that probably really knew how to mourn their dead more than any other people, what people would you consider to do that? The one that's been around the longest and probably seen what? More deaths than probably a lot of other people as far as nations are concerned. If they've learned how to mourn their dead, and they've written these prayers down for us to learn from, wouldn't it be just kind of obvious that we should learn from them? You know. And by the way, you think that the mourning, sure, I mean, it's about, okay, for so many days, you have a time of mourning, and you don't take care of yourself. You know, you block off all the mirrors. You don't look at yourself. You don't wear leather shoes. You know why you don't wear leather shoes, by the way? Sign of wealth. So why don't you wear leather shoes? No, there's a specific reason why. No, you just lost something. A great loss. So you're showing that this was a greater loss. You were wealthy because you had this person in your life, and all of a sudden you're what? You're not wealthy anymore. You're poor now, right? And most, after the 7 days, you know what you're supposed to do? You go to clean up, you go to the synagogue, and you get on with life. And the morning's over. I mean, you've done your morning.
Steps up to a year, though.
Once a month, every so often, you know, you go say a prayer. But the morning's really over. That's not really morning. If you look at the prayers, it's all about you. It's about bringing you. Your morning time is those few days, but then the morning's supposed to be over and you get on with your life. And yes, you do say the prayers for I think once a month, I think they call it. And then, by the way, from then on, you'll say them once a year on the anniversary of that person's death. You know, somebody's close to you. But the point is that you go through the mourning process, and then you go on with life. You can't mourn forever. If you mourn forever, you're stuck. You'll die. So, to me, you'll learn from these people that you have this time. Okay, I spent my time thinking, mourning, missing, you know, feeling the loss of this individual. But then life has to go on. You have to move from that loss into that other arena. And sometimes that's difficult, but we have to do it. And when you read those prayers, you know, that deal with that loss, if you read the prayers, they're about you moving on. And your life goes to a different level. So I would suggest people just look in the prayer book. I remember, and I'll close with this, by the way, because we're not going to get through here. I remember going to my aunt's funeral, and I was asked to participate up in Telco years ago. And, you know, I was more than glad to participate. In fact, it's quite an honor to participate, you know, in the burial of somebody. And we went to the graveside, and I had my prayer book with me. I used it, by the way, in my little resuscitation that I did, you know, at the funeral home. And when we went to the graveside, I basically said the graveside prayer. Straight out of the prayer book. And at the end of the graveside thing, one of the gentlemen that worked at the funeral home, I think he was the son of the owner, I think is what it was. Anyway, he came over to me and he says, "Man, that was the most beautiful prayer I've ever heard. Where did you get that at? Where did you find that at?" And, I opened the book up and handed it to him, and he looked at it. And, what happened was, the moment he saw that funny little writing in it, right back to him. Now this beautiful prayer that he just heard wasn't all that beautiful anymore for some reason. But reality is, it's not only a beautiful prayer, it's a moving prayer. But it's a prayer about people moving on from this point to that point. And, this person is gone, and we hope they've gone the right way. But we don't know. And the nice thing about it is, none of us sitting here gets to be the judge. There's only one. And he will judge. So we don't know. You may think, well, boy, that person was horrible, and he died, and he just went straight to Gehenna, and doubt if he'll ever make it to heaven, And I always remember old Dub Rayfield. You remember Dub? Dub would come visit me every now and then. And we were in there talking one day, and we walked outside, and Dub put his arm around me. And when he was getting up in his age, he'd come over and drink coffee with me occasionally. And Dub said, well, I read my Bible, and don't go to church much, kind of quit going to church and all that stuff. But one of Dub's favorite lines that I'll never forget, by the way, was, it has to be an old country line, he's an old country feller. He said, but son, he said, it's not always the cow that bellers the loudest that gives the most milk. So you know what he's talking about, right? I mean, we all know what he's talking about. People that go to church, every time the door's open, but they're not. Yeah, exactly. I mean, they want to broadcast, I'm serving God, I'm living for God, when it comes down to it, they're not really giving very much. It may look like on the outward they are. And I'll never forget that. Michael Dub said, it's not always the cow that bellers the loudest that gives the most milk. And that's true. I mean, that is a true case. As most of us that grew up on farms and had cows know, it's not always the cow that starts bellering that gives the most milk. But that's our call, by the way, is to direct our prayers with our words, with our intent, and remember how we are to enter into his court, the king's court. Praise, thanksgiving. That gets us into the court. Once we're in the court, it should make us think, we're standing in the presence of the King of the universe. What are we going to say now? I got here, but what do I say now? Right? So, for those that have a Jewish prayer book, thumb through it. You'll find some of the prayers very enlightening. They will help you in your prayers. Some you can just say. That will get you at least directed into the throne room. And it clears your mind, too, because you know why? You don't have to worry about what you're going to say. It's already there. So you can concentrate on what's there. Understand the words, by the way. Understand what you're saying. But concentrate on those and say them. And for most people that are Protestant oriented, by the way, it's hard for us to think about using a prayer book, right? Because we were into that doing what? Spontaneous prayer. Is there anything wrong with spontaneous prayer? Absolutely not. We should do spontaneous prayer. I'm not going to whip my prayer book out when I'm right in the middle of being killed or something, right? So what do? God help me. Where's that in the prayer book? Oh, I got to find that prayer for. No, I ain't got time to do that. So spontaneous prayer, you do that, okay? But don't discount the fact that prayer and the written down prayers of people for generations cannot be effective for you, and to really help you in your prayer life, because they can and they will if you'll apply them. They help you direct your words, and they'll help you to direct your heart. Clear your mind and get you focused on what you're supposed to be doing. And that's your entering into the throne room of God. And the very first way you get there is with prayer and thanksgiving. And after you're there, then you can begin with certain requests. All right? Okay, any questions or comments over what we've gone over so far? We didn't get too far, but we're not in any race that I know of. Okay?
Just a human race.
Just a human race. No questions or comments, and God willing, we'll start right here at page 695. We're still in the Gate of Self-Accounting, chapter 3, and I think we're still on number 9. We might get to 31 these days, but it'll be okay. If we learn getting to number 30, that's fine. If we don't, then we just wasted our time, right? So next week we'll pick up right on page 695.